So here's 20 things I learned from doing 5 months of Workaway. Let's get into it. So we stayed at 4 separate Workaways. The first one was a farm in County Clare, Ireland. The second one was a farm helping an older woman near Mallow, just north of Cork. The third one was in Scotland for a month. We were at a Buddhist retreat near Inverness, and we did a lot of different tasks from painting to digging trenches to laying concrete to building decks for little tiny houses. The last one was in the Netherlands, near Venlo, where we did some demolition work and also trying to build houses for an eco-village. So here's 20 takeaways. So maybe what surprised me most about Workaway after starting was just how kind of laid back everything is. Like, you don't really need to be an expert at pretty much anything, at least for the places that we went. I imagine it's kind of across the board in general. Like the farms that we went to, the first farm we went to actually, like the woman put us in charge of pretty much the entire farm. And it was like a pretty big farm. They had 3 huge polytunnels. They had a lot of trees to take care of and prune. And she was basically gone for 3 out of the 4 weeks. So, that gives you an idea of how much responsibility you might have and how much it might just be like work and not so much learning. I think that was a big surprise for me. Is I was expecting to learn a lot, but it was actually more just like, what work can you do? In most of the places, that's what you were going to be doing. And the reality matched expectations in maybe 2 of the 4 places. The first one, it definitely did not match. Like, they left out some really important things. For instance, like, we were not told that they were going to be gone 3 out of the 4 weeks. We were not told that there was going to be a cat living in the house with us who was very old, who was pooping and peeing everywhere. We were not told, the level to which we were going to be managing everything. So we just didn't have a full picture of what we were going to be doing there and what the work entailed. And then the only other place where it didn't match our expectations was the last one where we were part of the eco village. We did not realize it was going to be so much demolition. We did demolition for maybe like 80% of our time there. And then once we finally finished all that, we started building. But yeah, it's really important to make sure that you clarify all of your duties, exactly what you're going to be doing. Over communicate is probably a good rule when it comes to Workaway, because they tend to leave some things out in the listings from what we've seen. And that's convenient for them, but it's not so convenient for the Workaways who might, get taken advantage of, or who might not know, things that they wish they had known if they, knew the right questions to ask. So try to create a list of questions that aren't exactly from the listing that they've made, because there's probably some things that are important that you wish you knew. So yeah, try to create a list of questions that address those things. Yeah, so how many hours were we really working compared to what's listed is a good question. And this was definitely a source of trouble at 2 of the places. One of them was because we were in charge of the entire place, and that required doing a lot of work when we were already done with work, right? To manage something, to make sure, rain's not getting on some things, whatever it is. There were definitely situations where like there was a problem that needed to be addressed, and it was on non-working hours. So that's another thing that you need to be clarifying is like, do we need to be working at certain times if X happens, right? Are there like emergencies, or like is it really strict with how the timeline is broken up? The second place, we actually just assumed that cooking would be a part of the working time, which in hindsight is our fault. Like we should have clarified, we should have asked whether that would be working time or not. And it ended up, being a little bit of an issue when we first had that conversation, because she was under the impression that cooking was just a part of our daily tasks that everyone has to do in life. But to us, we're like, well, we're cooking for everybody, so we feel like we should, have that be part of our workday. So yeah, that's just something you need to clarify. That's a really big one that we also saw elsewhere. Yeah, so the hosts are pretty flexible. I would say that in general, they were trying their best to accommodate, what we needed. Not every host had a vehicle to transport us, so we had to rely on public transport a lot. And in some of these places, it was pretty expensive, so we were feeling a little bit isolated a lot of the time. But we specifically chose workaways that were just part time, right? Like 5 to 6 hours of work a day. And honestly, most places that we went to, it was more like 4 hours of real work because you ate in there, like you talked in there, you planned, you did a morning meeting a lot of the time. So that kind of stuff takes up some time, and it makes it so that the workday isn't so overwhelming. And that's why my wife had a part-time job online remote, which she could do on top, and she wasn't too overburdened by that in most places. The meals were actually great. At pretty much every place we went to, there was multiple workaways with us, multiple volunteers with us. The way that meals would work is there'd be one kind of shared meal a day, and it would be on a rotation for who would cook. And they would just cook a lot, so there could be enough for everybody and potentially leftover food for like dinner or whatever it would be. But because there were so many volunteers at most of these places and from so many different parts of the world, we would get a lot of varying food. The food was, we learned a lot of new recipes. We got to see dishes from places that we never thought we would. And yes, it was always free. That was a big important thing for us, was to make sure that wherever we're going, that they do provide free food, because that is a huge expense. And I think that is also typical with Workaway, that pretty much every place offers free food. Now, was it enough is not so cut and dry, because for me, I eat a lot, and for me, I felt like I needed more than what was cooked. But there was almost always something provided, like, whether it would be leftovers or, just stuff from the grocery store that the host would get. Like, there was definitely enough to survive. It was never about like that. Yeah, being vegan wasn't actually too hard. I mean, we specifically chose vegan listings. Like, I worked really hard to find places that could accommodate vegans when applying to Workaway. So that's just something you have to do up front. But even the places that said we can accommodate vegans, we're not actually vegan, those places also were pretty accommodating. So yeah, it's not impossible, but it's something you definitely have to communicate very heavily on if it's something that you care a lot about. Okay, so the housing and the comfort might be the biggest letdown. For me, I'm not too picky. For my wife, it was a little troublesome. So yeah, the first one, like I said, a lot of information was omitted, and there was mold all over our room. And I got really sick for 3 out of the 4 weeks of being there, and I hadn't been sick for years, right? And it affected me after the trip. So like, it was really problematic. So there's molds, like there was, in a couple of the places there were only cold showers. There were no warm showers. We were like, oh my God, is this going to be the entire time? And then there were also outhouses in some of the places and no inside bathroom. So that's something that you really need to clarify first, if that's something that matters to you. Comfort, utilities, warm showers. Oh my gosh, warm showers. You have to clarify if that's something that you need. So yeah, the second woman, she was like, yeah, I'm all about Wim Hof. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm all about Wim Hof. And then I get there and I'm like, wow, she's really about Wim Hof. She only does cold showers, and she doesn't have the ability to do warm showers. And lastly, 3 out of the 4 places we stayed were not very private. So the first one, our room was directly over someone else's room, and she had told us, I can hear every single thing that you do on day number 2. So we were like, oh dear God. The second place, we were actually like 1 room away from the host. And then the last one, the majority of the time that we were there, we were sharing a kind of like small unit, caravan type thing with one other person. So maybe that's just par for the course. Maybe that's just to be expected with Workaway. I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely make sure you ask about that. Yeah, so for the most part, we got along pretty well with the hosts, but we're also not super confrontational people. The only one was the first one where she actually was cooking with mold, and she didn't reveal this to the guests. This was the host. And I was only notified by one of the other Workaways, and she's like, "Oh, by the way, there's mold in the food." So I confront her about that, and that was pretty much the only host that we had trouble with because they just didn't seem to really care about the Workawayers as much as the other ones. And this was the one who was gone for 3 out of the 4 weeks. So yeah, that's not something you can really gauge beforehand unless you have a Zoom or a video chat meeting, which we didn't have without Workaway. And we also didn't ask these questions that I'm advocating asking for here. So really important to maybe have a video call first, clarify a bunch of things, get a feel for who the person is, and then continue. But definitely overall, we had a really good experience with the hosts. I think a couple of the Workaways we would go back to because of how much we really enjoyed the hosts, the other Workawayers, and the type of work. It was like pretty fulfilling at a couple places. But yeah, others you need to clarify. Yeah, so like I said, we met a bunch of Workawayers. We met people from Croatia, Denmark, Mexico, England, right? They were kind of all over the world at these Workaways, and that made it really fulfilling for us. Like we didn't just do this just to like learn about permaculture, which was probably my number one thing, but we also wanted to meet people, we want to make friends across the world and see different cultures, and you will definitely get that in Workaway if you have other Workaways who are staying there, because a lot of the time, from what we're seeing, it's kind of a wide spectrum of who's coming to these places. Yeah, and we really enjoyed that. You know, for the most part, you get some really cool interactions, cool perspectives on things, and yeah, highly encourage Workaway just because of that aspect. So the only major cultural difference that we noticed was maybe not an issue, but just affected our stay was the Netherlands, because we don't speak Netherlands, we don't speak Dutch, and yeah, definitely it was definitely a strange vibe because, you know, I think there were at one time there was like 12 other Workawayers at this eco village with us, and so many situations they'd be speaking Dutch, and we're just not a part of the conversation. So yeah, looking back, I still really appreciate the time in the Netherlands, but it did make it hard to be a part of the culture, and I wish I had tried to learn more, especially beforehand. We learned some when we were there, but I think if you're going to be going to a place with a different language, try to learn at least a little bit so you can, you know, try to build on that while you're there, and yeah, maybe just try to incorporate yourself into that culture a little bit more. But aside from the Netherlands, you know, like we went to Ireland and Scotland, which are both English speaking. So, you know, the culture shock wasn't too dramatic in these places. Okay, so funnily, we had no idea that the skills we'd be learning would be social skills, right? Like how to work with other people in a community. That was pretty much the main thing we learned. And what works, what doesn't work, how to structure a shared area, all these kinds of things. Those seem to be the most valuable things that we gained as a skill out of this, and how to incorporate that into our community in the future and in the present. But what was a little bit of a letdown in some ways was, you know, having these high expectations of what we're going to learn. You know, having an expectation that we're going to learn X about farming or X about permaculture, and that didn't happen. But that doesn't mean we didn't learn a bunch of other valuable things. So it's just maybe good to go with an open mind about what you're going to actually get out of the experience, rather than have like a very fixed, like, I'm going to get this out of Workaway. I think it's going to be a little bit different than what one imagines. Yeah, did we ever feel like we were being taken advantage of, and how do we handle it? There was one situation where it was very obvious. There were definitely other situations, but I'll say one where there was this handyman who had come over to the house, and the host asked him, like, oh, could we move some of these pipes in the ground, like the conduit lining for the electrical and the water. And the guy had said, no, this is a night job. This isn't a night job. And she kept asking, like, no. He's like, no, I can't do it in the day. And to me, it's very obvious he was saying, like, okay, we can't do it in the day because I can get caught and it's not legal. because they were in the road, right? So cars were driving over this, and he's like, no, you can't do that during the day. And then the next day, I mean, I was there listening to this conversation, but the next day, this woman asks me to do some shoveling. She words it as shoveling, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm down for shoveling. And then she's like, okay, well, there's this conduit in the road, and I know that she's immediately asking me to, try to dig out these wires so I can lower them because they're a little high in the road, right? But I didn't look it up then. I had to look it up afterwards, and I'm like, yeah, that's illegal. So yeah, there's some things that you definitely might get taken advantage of as a workawayer because you're a volunteer, right? You're not getting paid. You don't have any workers' rights, right? You have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. You know what you're doing is legal and not legal, is safe and not safe. And yeah, put your foot down when they're trying to exploit you, for more time than you've agreed to, or for doing a job that you was not in the work agreement. Even though there's no contracts with Workaway, you have to verbally kind of put your foot down on these things. Looking back, that's what I would have done. Yeah, overall, we felt pretty safe. I mean, we're a couple, so it's a little different than maybe going as an individual or as a woman. But yeah, honestly, we got really good vibes from pretty much everybody. There was only a couple people that stood out as like, maybe people we don't want to interact with. But overall, I think Workaway attracts a type of person who's very open to new experiences, has an open mindset towards differences in people, and that definitely, was true in our conversations with people. People generally were like really open to different ways of thinking, different cultures, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, honestly, I would recommend Workaway even to individuals. We met a ton of individuals who were doing Workaway, even people who were doing it full time, like that was their life. And yeah, I think overall it's mostly good people. So the two biggest challenges, one was the comfort thing that I mentioned earlier, like really need to clarify whether there's going to be the types of comforts that you need, such as warm showers, no mold in the room, like is there an animal, those types of things. And then the second thing would just be like how long it was, and the type of work that we were doing wasn't as fulfilling as we thought it was, right? So I think if the type of work was more fulfilling and more engaging and more about learning, I think I could have done it longer. But the fact that it was a lot more tedious than we had thought, a lot more tedious than the listings had made out to seem, but also like the length of time. We were gone for 5 months from home, and yeah, it definitely, you get homesick after a certain period of time. But yeah, those were the biggest challenges. So personally, I could not do Workaway long term, longer than 5 months. I think that's about the limit. But for sure, like I said, there are people who do it for months at a time. There was one guy in particular who had been doing it, I think, for like the past 6 years or so, like a really, really long time, and he just is trying to live off of it. There's a couple more people who are doing it for a year plus, and were really integrated into the community and potentially joining the communities, right? So yeah, it's definitely something that people could do year round. If you're going to do that, really do a lot of research into the listing, into the reviews, ask a lot of questions. Yeah, and there's no harm in trying some out, right? Like you could leave at pretty much any time. There's no contract. So yeah. So balancing Workaway with personal things like work or even just downtime seemed really manageable. Like I said, my wife has a part-time job, had a part-time job during Workaway. I was doing, YouTube videos and writing and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, there's plenty of time for that as long as you're doing a part-time Workaway. And, the work isn't insanely draining. So the three biggest pieces of advice I would give to my past self before starting Workaway for 5 months are: one, ask more questions. Number two, always have a video call before going to a Workaway. And number three, be open to new experiences and don't go with too many expectations of what you'll get out of it. So after 5 months, would I recommend Workaway? Yes, definitely yes. I think overall we got a lot out of the experience, even though it's totally different than what we imagined we would. We have a chance to see a lot of places we would never see otherwise because it's way too expensive to do all these things as like a vacation. If you do it where you have your stay and your food paid for, that's the two biggest expenses. And especially if you have a part-time job or something to make passive income, you can definitely do it with very little expenses. And relying on public transport, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I highly recommend Workaway to someone who's like trying to explore, to someone who's open to new experiences, meeting new people from different cultures. There's just so much in it that I think is really valuable. And I think we're going to do it again, and I think we're actually going to have hosts come out to the land once we start building for our community as well. I think maybe my favorite experience was doing decking in Scotland. There was these like tiny Buddhist retreat huts that we were building some decking for. It was just me and one other guy, and neither one of us is a professional, and the hosts knew we weren't professionals, but they just gave us kind of loose guidelines, and it gave us the chance to be like, okay, let's learn about this. Let's look into it. What do professionals say about doing this type of work, and how to make the foundation, and what kind of joists are the most stable for the longest amount of time, and making sure rot doesn't happen. That was really fulfilling, and that's something that I didn't know I was going into beforehand. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that will happen with Workaway. Is you'll probably be doing something you didn't know you'd be doing, and you'll get a chance to also choose. Right on that Workaway, there was many different jobs that every morning we would decide, okay, who's doing what, and you'd be able to just be like, yeah, I'd like to do decking today. For the most part. So the hardest part was being taken advantage of at the Workaway that I told you about, where I was being asked to do things that were not legal, where overall we had some conflicts with the host, and yeah, looking back, there were a lot of red flags in the listing that we should have asked about. We should have gotten a video call. So I think with enough communication, we can in the future make sure that there's a low likelihood that we have another one of those experiences. So that's it. That's 20 things that we learned from doing Workaway for 5 months. And yeah, after all of that, we definitely see ourselves using it in the future. We definitely see ourselves hosting people in the future, once we get up and running. And yeah, my biggest advice is like, know your worth as a volunteer. Please ask questions, right? I think we met so many volunteers that also felt the same way as we did, like taken advantage of in certain times, doing more work than they're supposed to, different type of work than they were supposed to be doing. And yeah, know your boundaries, assert those boundaries, and over communicate would be it. And have fun. I'll see you next time. Peace.